This week on Uncut Gems with Slim.
If you want to be a more positive individual, you can't continue to consume garbage. You have to filter what you consume because you are what you eat. Hey y'all, welcome back for another episode of Uncut Gems with Slim. I'm your host, Jasmine, better known as Slim Reshae, and today we are talking about a topic that I know we deal with every day, which is making decisions. And I've talked about this again in previous podcast episodes about how decisions are a big part of what makes us human and a big part of our life. And when it comes to making decisions from the outside looking in, a lot of times it is easy to analyze and criticize a decision that someone makes, right? Like you ever witness someone make a decision and you're like, why would they do that? And you start making your own opinions and things about the decision that was made. And when I started to think about that, I was like, you know what? The real tea isn't the decision in itself. If you really want to get to the nitty gritty, is figuring out what the intent behind the decision was. That's the real tea. For example, if someone who did you dirty tells you girl, I'm sorry. If they tell you it like that and they don't really mean it, it don't really carry weight. Versus if they made a decision to apologize and they were very genuinely apologetic and sharing, where they were coming from, why they made the choice that they made. So there are two things that are imperative when it comes to understanding, right? And that's intention and impact. I was in this Bible study last year and we were discussing this topic, and we found out that conflict often arises when there's a lack of understanding between your intention and your impact. It's kind of like when a parent makes a decision for a child. Their intent is to keep the child safe in their decision, but the impact that it might have on the child may make them feel like, oh, well, you just don't want me to have fun, or whatever it may be. The intention versus the impact is not in alignment, so there's a misunderstanding, and this can give way for frustration. And so the decisions that we make daily have impact, whether we get to see that actual impact or not. Everything has an impact, and sometimes that impact might not reflect your intentions. Now, on the flip side, when there is someone who is impacted by you and they understand your motive, then there's a level of understanding. And this concept doesn't only resonate with personal relationships, but it's also beneficial when it comes to the professional realm. For instance, when your colleagues understand your motives, then collaboration becomes a little bit more seamless, and then teams are able to work together towards a common goal, which is what everyone wants in a healthy workplace. Same thing when it comes to your personal life. It's the alignment of your intention and impact that helps foster genuine connections and understanding between people. Speaking of genuine connections, when you think about meeting new people, sometimes it's hard to decipher the vibes, because when you get to know people, some people have a guard up, and sometimes their intention and their impact don't really align because you don't have, context for everything, or you don't have all the information to make informed decisions. So I think sometimes it can be hard, especially for me, experiencing failed talking stages, failed situationships. Often enough, when those types of relationships come to an end, when you think about it, the root of it is actually a misalignment of the intention and the impact behind, whether that be conversations that you have, actions that are made, or decisions that have been decided. Those are the different things where if you don't understand, and they don't have to specifically be okay, you intended this for me and it impacted me in a different way. It's less about those two things being in alignment versus the understanding piece coming into play, because you may intend something a certain way and it may have impacted me, it may have hurt my feelings, but you didn't intend it that way. That doesn't discredit the fact that it hurt my feelings, but as we have a conversation to fully understand okay, well, this was the intention behind it, And you need that understanding from both sides. So say if someone kind of offended me, but they had good intentions, we can move forward once we have the conversation where I'm able to understand the intention, but also for the person who offended me, where they are able to understand the impact that it had on me. And then once you both have understanding, that is a way that kind of allows you to move forward in situations. When we take time to communicate our motives clearly, listen to others, actively listen, listening to respond and not to react, we can create an environment that is a little bit more empathetic and prone to understanding one another. Now, this approach is a great approach because it can transform conflicts into opportunities for growth through constructive conversations where people can feel heard. It's hard to move forward from a misunderstanding when a person involved in the situation does not feel heard. Like, a major part of understanding is to be heard. So that's why it's important to, one, when you're listening to someone and you're having like a conversation that may not be on one accord, when you're listening to them, listen to respond, like actually hear them. Don't listen to react. Listen to respond to them in a constructive manner where you're actually hearing what they have to say. And sometimes when you have conversations like this, you may need to take a pause, take a step back, and revisit the conversation when your emotions aren't as heightened. So anytime like you get in like an emotional, conversation, I always recommend, if you cannot talk it through, in that moment, it's okay to just be like, you know what, I am very upset right now, or I am very angry right now, and I would like to continue this conversation once I kind of regulate my attitude, okay? And that's a part of self-awareness that is very key, because you could do more damage by having a conversation when your emotions are heightened than if you were to just be like, you know what, I'm not feeling it right this moment. Can we revisit this when my head is a little bit more clear? Just saying that in itself not only lets the party involved know that, like, I do care about this conversation, I do care about this situation, but right now is probably not the most constructive time for me to respond to you, So that's allowing them to know, like, I got something to say, but I don't want to say it right now, because if I say it right now, I might say, the wrong thing or something I can't take back, depending on, your level of how rowdy and spicy you are. But when you have those constructive conversations, people are able to feel heard. And when people feel heard, they feel valued. And that allows us to build more stronger, compassionate relationships. So in any setting, whether that be platonic, professional, personal, taking time to communicate clearly and listen actively can literally make all the difference. So next time when you find yourself in a situation where there's a misunderstanding, pause and reflect and identify the motives that led to the disagreement. Whether you're the offender or the offended, just take a moment to try and identify the motives. And if the motives are unclear, feel free to ask the other party, like, what did you mean by that? Because I want to make sure I am understanding correctly and with the right perspective. I encourage you to engage in like an open dialogue. Assuming is one of the worst things we can do, because a lot of times we assume from our perspective and from our lens of life. And that can lead to you misdiagnosing someone's intention in a situation. So when you open up the conversation to understand the other person's perspective, you want to make sure you're making an effort to understand the perspectives around you. And once you identify the why behind the what, it allows you to discover the how. So what is the goal that we're trying to accomplish and why? The answer to those questions allow you to determine the most effective how and the steps that you'll need to take. Speaking of motives, it reminds me of this one service. My pastor said something and it took me aback, child. He said, corrective action that is results driven is manipulation. And I was like, wait a minute, I need you to unpack that. So I looked it up, and the definition of manipulation is a tactic used to control or influence others for personal gain. So the context he gave around this kind of quote, I guess you could say, was how when we attempt to get right with God, we need to check our motives and ensure that we're not just cleaning up our act because we want him to do something for us, because that is manipulation at its finest. And so that reminder helps me to check myself and make sure that my motives are in the right place and my actions aren't tactics of manipulation. A practical example of this for me is when I sow seed or tithe. Like, my motive behind sowing seed and tithing is I'm literally giving back to God what's already His. Like, it's not mine anyway. I'm borrowing it. So I'm just giving it right back to Him. Now, if my posture was like, oh, let me pay this little 10% so I can get qualified to get my 100-fold return, that is manipulation. So when it comes to God, like, you don't want to be like, oh, let me pray over my food just to make sure the Lord keep putting food on my table, or Lord, let me pay this 10% so somehow, some way my rent will continue to get paid. Like, that's not the mentality you should have behind the action that you're doing, right? So you want to make sure you're checking your motive, so you're not like manipulating it and you're treating God as if He's like a genie in the bottle. Another example is, are you praying to commune with God and build relationship, or are you just doing it to check it off your Christian to-do list? And be honest with yourself. Your motives oftentimes reveal your heart posture, and it might be time to check it. Clock it. If you're always given to receive, or you're just doing something to get something in return, then that can be a form of manipulation. Now, the scary thing about manipulation, when I started to think about it, is that it can happen to anyone, and even within ourselves. And what I mean by this is, sometimes your mind can try and manipulate your reality by like skewing your perspective based off of past experiences and what we consume daily. And y'all already know, I believe that you are what you eat. From the media we consume to the company we keep, it all plays a role in our perspective when it comes to our lives. For me, as an influencer, I am very aware of the responsibility that I have on me with the platforms that I have. Influence can be useful, don't get me wrong, but it can also be detrimental, because influence that is not properly managed can turn into manipulation. Some small examples of this could be like clickbait, or news headlines, or get-rich-quick schemes, those kind of things. But social media typically showcases the highlights of someone's journey, but it neglects to depict the full scope of from how someone got from point A to point B. So it's very important to be careful on how you consume things, because what you allow to influence you, you give access to manipulate you. That doesn't mean everything that influences you is manipulating you, but it has access to. You know what I'm saying? Now, that doesn't have to be a bad thing. Access and influence can be good in moderation, but when it comes to poor influences, they should have minimal access to you. And always remember, you have the power to choose what influences you allow in your life. So surround yourself with people and media that uplifts you and inspires you. I'm a big advocate for every now and again, going through your following list and cleaning it up. Like, if you're scrolling on your feed and you keep coming across someone's page that like makes you feel some type of way, or like is a trigger for you, it may be time for you to unfollow them. And it's no harsh blood or anything like that, but you're no longer allowing that media or that person to have access to you. You want to follow accounts and surround yourself with people who encourage growth and authenticity. And also seek out sources that will challenge you. You never want to be the sharpest pencil in the box. So you want to always have someone around you that will help challenge your way of thinking and expand your understanding, rather than surrounding yourself with people or social media that plays on your fears and your insecurities. That brings us to this week's gem. Keep your perspective in check. So I came up with 3 ways that we can put this into practice this week. Number 1, watch what you eat. Now, I would say this literally and figuratively, but I'm referring to filtering what you consume and the influence that you allow to have access in your life. So go ahead, sometime this week, take a few minutes to just go through who you're following on social media. Go through your Facebook friends, go through your news feed and see if there's any tea pages that you're following who only reports like negative things and stuff like that. Like, just go through it and kind of filter the media that you're consuming. And it kind of makes me think of this example where it's foolish to think that if I plant orange seeds, that the tree will produce apples. You have to literally sow in the direction of your faith. If you want to be a more positive individual, you can't continue to consume garbage. You have to filter what you consume, because you are what you eat. if you're around people who do certain things or participate in certain activities, eventually you're probably going to partake in those activities. And sometimes it can be subliminal things, like the things you consume will eventually show up in your thoughts. And then once they start showing up in your thoughts, they'll show up in your actions. An example that made me think of this is like Coach bags. Now, I love Coach down. I kid you not. I've been loving Coach from a long time ago. My first quote unquote designer bag was Coach. But after they I don't know, whoever cooking in the bag, after they started cooking with Crisco on these handbags and they started dropping the tabbies and the Lanas and all of these other bags, me and every one of your favorite influencers probably done bought one of them bags, right? And so you just keep seeing this all over your timeline. It's kind of like when you're at work, right? This is a real life example for me. So you be at work and it's like somebody at work, and when you first start working there, they don't faze you. It's like, oh, that's so-and-so, yeah, whatever. But after time keep after a while they start getting a little cute, you know what I'm saying? It be like, dang, but it's because you're around them so often, you're gonna start to, that stuff is gonna start showing up in your mind, and then it'll show up in your actions. So it'll go from oh, so and so, yeah, whatever, to dang, I do see him every day, and he kind of nice looking. He got a nice personality and all these things. Same thing. Them Coach bags, they are cute. You saw one influencer with it, you saw another influencer with it, and then you kept seeing people with it. You find yourself thinking about the bag, and then you oh, I kind of like that bag. I want that bag, and then you go buy that bag. Those are the different things. And like I said, that's the definition of influence. It has the power to create impact, for you to make decisions and take action. That is what influence is. But you have to make sure that you are filtering what you allow to influence you. Because if it's positive stuff and good things, great. But if you kind of go down, a rabbit hole and you're allowing negative things to influence you, that can also negatively impact your life. So you want to watch what you eat. Number 2 is to create thinking habits that align with God's promise. I'm a firm believer that your thoughts have a direct correlation with your actions. So my mindset is that if you filter your thoughts, your actions will follow suit. I guess relationships could be an example for this one. So say if you meet a guy, right? Okay, cool. And then you start thinking about him and all these things like that. What are your thoughts saying? Do your thoughts align with God's promise? If you meet someone and all you thinking is ooh, they fine and this and that and this and that and this and that, and it's giving a lust. Lust is not aligned with God's promise for your life, Bookie. Not right now. But say if your thoughts are I don't know, pure, and you feel like the qualities of this person aligns with the promise that God's giving you for either your spouse or the trajectory of your life. If you continue to think about this person that you met and all your thoughts are giving lustful and your thoughts are gonna correlate to them actions, and eventually you're gonna find yourself in a situation that you didn't plan on being in. And if you find yourself in that situation, that ain't aligned with God's promise, okay? So you have to make sure that you are creating thinking habits that are aligned with God's promise. So if you're thinking something, or you want to make a decision or take action on something, think about it and be does this align with what God has for me? Does this boo-boo head align with the trajectory that the Lord has over my life and the plan and the direction he got me going in? Because if the answer is no, then I need to get up out of there, okay? And then last but not least, number 3 is to develop authentic actions from those thoughts, which basically means make sure your actions reflect mindful motives. So you don't want to take action or make decisions and say things where your motives aren't in check. You always want to check your motives, check your mindset first before you make those decisions. Be slow to anger, be slow to speak. Think on the things before you just do something, right? You want to make sure that even when it comes to tough conversations, being slow to speak, taking the time to really analyze the intention of what you're about to say, but also considering the impact that it'll have on the other person. And that's a big thing as well. Sometimes it's like, well, this was my intention. It's not my fault how it impacted you. Like, I can't control how you feel, you know what I'm saying? And that may be true, but at the same time, you can be considerate of other people's emotions beforehand. So like, I don't know, if I'm having a conversation with my mom and I know it's a sensitive topic, even though I have a clear intention behind what I want to say, I may dress up my words a little bit differently in order for it to not have a harsh impact on her, but it can still be constructive. So that's conversations with anyone. You can still be considerate and mindful of your intentions, but also making sure you're being mindful of the impact that it might have on someone else. So make sure you guys try out those 3 tips this week to make sure you keep your perspective in check. I hope you guys enjoyed this week's episode, and until next week.